that means that they value my services more than the 100, and I value the 100 more than my foregone leisure. When you buy a newspaper for 50 cents, you value the newspaper more than 50 cents. They value the 50 cents more than the newspaper. So again, there's gain. Absolute necessity gain in the ex ante sense of anticipations. Now, ex post, afterwards, sometimes we regret trades. Boy, I wish I didn't buy this pen or whatever. This shirt is no good. That's, tough. That's the way reality is. People change their minds. But at the time you bought it, you had to value it more than what you had to give up for it. Otherwise, you wouldn't have done it. So every trade, buying, selling, renting, working for someone, employment, employee status, whatever it is, it's mutually beneficial. And it doesn't matter if it's a foreigner or not. It doesn't matter if you buy a pineapple, well, Hawaii is no longer a foreigner, but banana from Costa Rica. We value the banana more than it costs us, and they value the money they're getting or whatever they're going to buy from us in return. So again, there's mutual trade. Does anyone ever lose out from trade? Well, no. They're not part of the market anymore. See, all participants in the market benefit from trade. But there are certain people who were once part of the market who are no longer part of the market, and they have to get their act together if they're going to want to be part of the market again. For example, the horse and buggy industry was a fine industry. They had horse breakers and saddle makers and whip makers and blacksmiths and all sorts of people working there. And then along came Henry Ford and a few other people. And now these people are no longer part of the market. So they didn't lose. It's just that they're no longer able to make us offers that we value more than the costs that they impose on us. So all trade is voluntary, and all voluntary trade is mutually beneficial. There's no exploitation. What about unions? Well, the claim is, if we didn't have a union, people would be paying people 50 cents an hour, sweatshops. We economists have a theory of wages, why it is that wages are what they are. And the theory is that wages are what they are based on productivity. Why does Shaquille O'Neal get a lot of money? Or Tom Hanks get a lot of money? Because they can put a lot of seats, a lot of rear ends in seats, people willing to pay to see them do whatever it is they do. Why do we here make a middle class salary? Because our productivity is middle class. We're pretty productive. That's why we make what we make. A guy who pushes a broom, why does he make less? Because he is able to contribute less to society. We have this theory in economics called wages equal productivity. It's actually wages equal marginal revenue productivity discounted, but we don't have to get into that. It's just roughly productivity. So suppose that Anthony Gregory's productivity is $5 an hour. What that means is that if we hire him for our factory or whatever it is we're doing, our receipts will go up by $5 for every hour we've got him. Now, what would we like to pay him? Well, we're capitalist pigs. We want to exploit him. The first wage offer is a penny. I offer a penny for his services. And I'm going to make $4.99 off of him. Isn't that great? Can exploit him. But this guy here in the pink shirt, what's your name? Keith. Keith is also a capitalist pig, but his thinking is, well, it's good that Walter is exploiting Anthony. That's great. He supports exploitation in the philosophical sense. But better that Keith make the profit than I make the profit. So what does Keith do? He says, 2 cents an hour. Now, it's true, now he's only going to be exploiting him to the tune of $4.98 instead of $4.99. But the guy next to him in the orange shirt, Bill is going to say, the hell with Walter and Keith. I want to exploit Anthony, and I'll offer him 3 cents an hour. Because better that I make $4.97 off of the sweat of his brow than these guys make $4.98 or $4.99. Well, you see where this is going. I'm not going to go all the way up to $5, otherwise I'd, exhaust my whole hour here. Wages under productivity get bid up by competing workers, the competing employers. On the other hand, suppose the wage is $20 an hour. Well, if the wage is $20 an hour for this guy, and he's only producing 5, well, I'm losing 15 on him. That's not going to last. So a wage above productivity can't last. A wage below productivity can't last. That's why wages tend to equal productivity. So if you want to ask the question, what is the effect of unions on wages, you must first ask, well, what is the effect of unions on productivity? Well, now that's an easy one. It doesn't raise productivity. All they do is engage in strikes and internecine debates as to which union gets this control and go out on strike. How does that increase productivity? It's beyond belief. We have all sorts of empirical, I won't say proofs, because I'm an Austrian economist, but illustrations. The mainstream would say proofs of this. I would just say illustrations. And that is, the union movement only came into being in 1920, the AFL. There was the Wobblies in the 19th century, but they didn't really amount to much. But wages have been on the increase for the last 500 years, long before the institution of unions. So unions are hardly necessary for wage increases. Remember, it's based on productivity, not unions. So we've had productivity increases before unions. The highest unionization rate was in the 50s and the 60s when the unions were some 35% of the labor force, the private labor force. But wages have been going up since then, and the amount of unionization, percentage of unionization, has been going down. Now the percentage of unionization is only 9% of the private labor force. The main growth in unions is public sector. But that's silly. It goes against the whole theory of unions, because unions are supposed to counteract employer greed, private employer profit greed, exploitation. But by definition, governments are wonderful. They wouldn't exploit anyone, right? So why do you need a public sector union? Now, when I do my lecture on Sunday, I'll explain or attempt to explain whether and to what degree I think unions are compatible with libertarianism. That's a different question. But right now I'm just trying to get at the effects of unions. There are many industries where unions are not at all, and yet the wages are very high. Nerds and geeks get paid well. Bill Gates pays a lot of money for computer people, banking, insurance. No unions there, none. The main effect of unions in this country was the Rust Belt. I used to work in Worcester, Mass. And in Worcester, Mass, they had acres and acres of oh, we've got more books here.
Yeah, more books.
You might be a little optimistic. I don't know. We'll see.
Well, I didn't want to sell anybody short.
Okay.
And in fact, I got to get more of these as well.
Okay. Bless you, my son. This is economics in action. The main effect of unions was raising wages above productivity levels. And when you raise wages above productivity levels, what do you do to companies? You make them bankrupt. So what they did is they went to the South. So instead of having a vibrant industry stretching from, I don't know, Chicago to Boston, you had shops coming down to Birmingham, Alabama, and setting up steel and cars and autos and all sorts of things like that. So the unions don't raise wages. What they do is they're like, who are those guys that get in you like a tapeworm? Unions are the tapeworm of the economy. They suck up stuff and they they ruin their host. They bankrupt their host. So unions are not a great thing economically speaking. The next one is the minimum wage law. Now, the minimum wage law is something that sort of tugs at the heartstrings of people. People say, well, don't be so niggardly, $5 an hour. Poor Anthony Gregory is only worth $5 an hour. You can't live on $5 an hour. And they go wax eloquent about how much you can't buy with $5 an hour. I don't know. During the last Olympics, they would always interview the winners, the gold medal winners, and a lot of them were Russians. And they would always show the Russian winner in a little apartment and driving a little red car. And then it caught up on me why they do that. And the reason is they want to show how well off they are. But in this country, if you work for McDonald's at minimum wage, you can buy a little red car and have an apartment, right? Only it's in the Soviet Union, you have to be a gold medal winner to get what our minimum wage workers can get. But be that as it may, I admit, $5 an hour isn't that great. But the point is that if we pass a law saying that we have to pay Anthony $7 an hour, and his productivity is only $5, then we're going to lose $2 an hour if we hire him, and we're going to go broke if we do too much of that, and he's going to be unemployed. Which is better, $5 an hour or zero? See, the minimum wage law is not an employment law. It's an unemployment law. It doesn't say who shall hire anyone. It just says if you hire people like that, you have to pay him 7, but it doesn't say you have to hire him. So why should I hire him? See, they think minimum wage law is sort of like a floor under wages. You raise it, and the salaries of poor people, low productivity people rise. No. If you want a physical analogy, the analogy is not a floor under wages raising them. Rather, it's a hurdle over which you have to jump to get a job in the first place. You have to have that much productivity in order to get a job. And if they set it at 7, as they're going to set it at 7, well, then people with 5 productivity aren't going to get a job at all. Look, if it were really true that the minimum wage law helps raise wages, contrary to what I said, that productivity is the determinant, why be so chintzy? Why be such a cheapskate? Why 7? Why not 70? Why not 700? With the stroke of a pen, we could all be rich. This is the lunacy of the people who favor minimum wages as an attempt to raise wages. Now, during the 50s, the minimum wage law rose the highest percentage from 40 cents to 70 cents that it's ever risen. Previously and afterward, it's always risen by a lower percentage increase. From 40 cents to 70 was almost a doubling. At 40 cents, those of you in the room who are about my age remember that in those days, if you got into an elevator, there was a guy standing there. He wasn't a pervert. He was the elevator operator. And, you know, you'd say, what floor? There's a lady of a certain age, my age, and she remembers. You young pups, you don't know from this stuff. You get in the elevator now, you press a button. There was none of that. There was this guy. You'd tell him what floor, and he'd sort of do this, and you'd get to the floor. The very next day, was anyone fired when they raised it from 40 to 70? No. So it starts looking good. People say, wow, you know, the minimum wage went from 40 to 70. Maybe it is a floor in the wages. But what happened after that is every week, every 2 weeks, I'm on drugs, cough drops. You have to excuse me. I'll explain this during my libertarian discussion. Every 2 weeks, they put in an automatic elevator. And at the end of 5 years, there were no more no more manually operated elevators. They were all self-serve. And people said, had nothing to do with the minimum wage law. It took a long time. It had something to do with interest rates, business cycle. No, it was the minimum wage. Look, in the old days, when you brought your car in to get service, you'd be attacked by 5 people. One would change the oil, look at the oil. Another one would look at the battery fluid. Another one would change the windshield liquid. Somebody put gas in your car. Someone would rub your windshield. You get 5 different people, entry-level jobs. And there's such a thing called on-the-job training. When you're working, you learn. Well, now it's self-serve. There's a lot of self-serve because these people are priced out of the market. We're not helping them. If the minimum wage law is so great, why do we have to have exceptions for the minimum wage? Why do we have to have exceptions for teenagers? Hire teenagers, they're always telling us during the summer when teenagers are out of school. Well, if it's so good, why do we have a teenage minimum wage that's half as much as the regular minimum wage? Again, more inkling that what's going on here is not raising wages, but making a hurdle over which you have to jump to get a job. Okay, the next one is the market sexist? By the way, a lot of the topics I'm now doing, hint, hint, is from this blue book here. These are labor economic issues. I'll get into some non-labor economic issues in a minute. Women earn about 70% as much as men earn. For every dollar a man earns in the market, a woman earns 70 cents. Give or take, it varies over the years, but it's roughly there. Why is this? Well, the critics of the market say it's due to the market is inevitably intrinsically sexist, racist. We're just bad. Capitalism is evil. What's the real story going on? Well, the real story going on is if 2 people each can run a 4-minute mile, and they get up to the starting blocks, and now one of them you put a 100-pound sack on his back, who's going to win the race? Obviously, the guy without the sack on his back. Well, women have a sack on their back, and what is the sack on their back? It's the marital asymmetry hypothesis. Boy, that was a big mouthful. Marital asymmetry hypothesis. what marriage does is it raises male wages and reduces female wages. Why? Because women have a 100-pound sack on their back, and it consists of more housework, house cleaning, shopping, child care than men. The usual joke is a man and a woman both have a PhD in chemistry. They work in the lab all day long. They come home, and what does the husband say to the wife? "What's for dinner, dear?" Namely, she's doing the cooking. She's doing the cleaning, the housekeeping. And when they're a kid, she does much, much more of that work than the man. I want to take a little survey here, and I'll offer you 3 options. And I want you to answer to me in terms of the marriage with which you're most familiar. If you're married, that marriage. If you're not married, your ex-marriage or your parents' marriage or somebody's marriage that you're intimately connected with, at least on an economic sphere. And the 3 choices are: the husband does more of the housework, house cleaning, child care than the wife. The second one is it's equal, and equal could be 55-45. Doesn't have to be 50-50. And the third one is that the wife does more of this housekeeping, house chores than the husband. How many say that the husband does more than the wife in the marriage that you're now thinking of? 2 liars. 3? Okay. Well, I'm just kidding. I noticed she didn't vote that way. How many say it's roughly equal? Okay, she voted for that. She's a liar. How many say that it's the woman that does more than the man? Okay, that is typical sociological research. I'm not a big fan of sociologists. They're all Marxists. But when they do research on this, in order to complain about it, they find out that the housekeeping is very disparate. And I have to mention something else, attachment to the labor force. If the 2 of you are now living in Denver and one of you gets a great job offer in Florida or somewhere, and the other has to be what's called the trailing spouse, take whatever he or she can get, where are you more likely to go, if it's the husband or the wife that gets the great offer? And again, even if the husband does more of the housework, which I don't believe except in very rare circumstances, they're much more likely to go if the husband is going, because if the wife is going to have 3 kids and she's going to space them 3 years apart, from the time of the first birth to the 3rd kid being able to go to school and the wife able to get back into work, 10 or 15 years. In many fields, if you take out 10 or 15 years on a part-time basis, you might as well forget about physics or chemistry. It changes. That's why you have this pink-collar ghetto for women, because they go into areas where their human capital will not atrophy. Secretary, maid, school teacher, librarian, things like that. Now, let me give you 2 sorts of proof or evidence of my contention that the real cause of the male-female disparity in incomes is this 50-pound or 100-pound sack on your back. The 2 proofs are, first of all, if it were really true that women and men have equal productivity. See, apart from this, they do have equal productivity. Maybe in the last century they didn't, because men are a little stronger than women, and in the 19th and the 18th century a lot of jobs depended upon brute force. But nowadays the way we dig a big hole to put a building in is with pressing a button for a steam shovel. So maybe in the old days you could have had unequal productivity between men and women, but nowadays most jobs the women can press a button just as well as the men. Okay. I think. One is the logical proof. What these feminists are trying to get us to believe is that men and women have equal productivity, and yet women get paid less. Suppose a man and a woman each have $10 an hour productivity, and the man gets paid $10 an hour, and that's fine because in equilibrium there are 0 profits, as we saw with that mental experiment with up to $5 for a $5 productivity. The woman it's as if she's wearing a little lapel pin saying, hire me and make an extra $3 an hour. Because I'm worth the same $10 an hour as the man is, but you're paying me $7. See, if this were true, then all the industries dominated by male employees, like forestry, lumber, steel, things like that, would be making very little profits, and all the areas dominated by female employees would make a lot of profits. But you can't have differential profits that last long, because resources will go from the low profit to the high profit area until there's some sort of equilibration. So this thing is nonsense. It's dead from the neck up. It can't be. It must be that if women's salaries are 70% as much as men, that their productivity in the market is 70%, not because they're stupider, but because they have this 50-pound or 100-pound sack on their back, which consists of marital asymmetry phenomenon. Another bit of statistics for those of you who are statistically oriented, the ratio between men and women, female to male, is 70%, all females versus all males. But if you bifurcate the sample into married and never married is widowed, divorced, separated, married. If you've ever been touched by the institution of marriage, now the ratio is something like 50%, 45%. Whereas if you take never marrieds, the ratio is 90, 95, 98. I've got as high in my statistical work as 109.8, namely women of a certain education make a little bit more than men. In other words, another indication that this theory that I'm trying to push on you good people is correct is when you bifurcate the sample into ever and never marrieds, now all of a sudden the never marrieds are not being discriminated against at all. They're making the same salary. And if you use age as a proxy for marital status, namely you take the male-female ratio of anyone under 24, most of the people under 24 have never been married. Again, there's virtually no difference between men and women. So this is an indication that the market is not sexist. It's just because of voluntary choices of women to take on certain jobs. Let me talk a little bit about drug legalization. Again, I'm reserving the discussion of whether we should legalize drugs or not for my libertarian talk on Sunday. Now I'm just going to talk about the economics of it. Well, the economics of it are not good from the point of view of humanist people or people who like human beings, as opposed to the people I mentioned in the other room who are good economists but hate people. Because what happens when you prohibit, whether it's drugs or alcohol, and the analogy between drugs and alcohol is pretty strong. Over here you have marijuana, over here you have beer. Over here, one step up from marijuana is cocaine, and the step up from beer is wine, and the step up from wine is liquor, and the step up from cocaine is heroin. So you have three different kinds of drugs, three different kinds of spirited beverages, whatever you want to call it. What happens when you prohibit this is, I sort of feel naked. I don't have chalk and a blackboard, but if you can visualize the supply and demand curve, is that the supply curve shifts to the left. There's much less supply because it's illegal and people are afraid to go to jail. Well, when you shift the supply curve to the left, the price goes way, way up. Now look, marijuana is a weed. It's a lot cheaper to produce marijuana than it is asparagus. Asparagus is very labor intensive to produce it. You have to have care and feeding for asparagi, or if that's the plural, I'm not sure. If it was legal, the price would be, I don't know, various estimates are $5 or $10 a week for a marijuana habit, and similar low prices for cocaine and heroin, very, very low. At that low price, has anyone got to kill for it? No. If you could buy this stuff for $5 or $10 or $15 a week, nobody'd have to kill for it. You wouldn't have gangs shooting it out with each other over turf. You wouldn't have people having to go out and rob and commit mayhem in order to get the money in order to support a habit which might cost $2,000 a week, $2,500 a week, and poor people can't afford that. So you have two sources of mayhem. One, gangs shooting it out with each other over turf for heroin sales or cocaine or marijuana. Very similar to the Elliot Ness movies that you had in Chicago, where they'd be shooting it out with machine guns over who could sell booze. Anyone shooting it out over who can sell booze nowadays? No, the idea is silly. And yet at one time they did. So it's got nothing to do with the chemical makeup of the thing. It's rather because the thing is prohibited. When it's prohibited, the price rises. When the price rises, you inherit the whirlwind. You create crime. The U.S. has now got, I was going to say on a per capita basis, more prisoners than any other country, but that's not true. Or that's true, but even on an absolute basis, and China's got a lot more people than we do. We now have more criminals on an absolute basis than any other country in the world. People in jail on this victimless crime of heroin or drug selling or what have you. One of the problems with New Orleans, see, before Katrina occurred, I'm from New Orleans, so this sort of reverberates with me. Before New Orleans, you get a little blip in the crime rate whenever they close down one housing project. Because whenever they closed down one, the drug people there had to go elsewhere, and the people elsewhere wanted the turf, and these people wanted the new turf, so there was a little war until we figured out who had the turf. But now, after Katrina, a whole bunch of these drug people went out to Houston and Atlanta, and they start trickling back. Every week, another 10 or 15 come back, and there's more fighting. So this problem is going to last a long while. If they would just legalize the stuff, they could get rid of the crime. Have a new industry, too. But no, they're not about to do that. Okay, another one is body parts. We have a crisis of used body parts. Kidneys, livers, hearts, spleens, blood, all sorts of inner stuff. The kidney is interesting because we each have an extra one, and we could sell it. But the way it goes now is you can't sell it because it's deemed illicit by our progressive friends to buy and sell these things. In other words, it's okay to give it away, but if you do it for money, no good. Which is a little weird. I mean, you'd think if it's okay to do X for free, then it's okay to charge for it. Same sort of thing in prostitution. If it's okay to have sex with a consenting adult, it should be okay to pay for it, but no. For these people on the left, paying for something is per se evil. Well, what happens is sort of an economist nightmare, because economists have this fetish for cooperation and coordination. And what you have is needless people going to the grave because they can't get a kidney, heart, liver, spleen, whatever. And then needless heart, liver, spleens, blood going into the grave because they're not allowed to sell it to people who need it. You know what they call motorcycles? Donor mobiles. Because people who drive motorcycles are usually not my age. I'm 66. You know, what you want when you want a transplant is somebody like Anthony Gregory, who's a little younger than me, someone in their 20s, early 20s, late teens, and these are the people riding motorcycles. There is one good thing for the present law against markets and body parts, and that is that it creates a lot of dramatic movies and TV programs. You know, here's a little girl who needs a heart. Will she get it? And you know what their favorite days for the people who want to receive kidneys or hearts or livers? July 4th, Memorial Day, when there are a lot of smack-ups on the highways. Because then you have more of a supply of these things. So that's the one good thing about it. You have a lot of more movies. But look, how many of you people, let me take another survey, on your license plate there's a little thing that if you die, you are willing to donate your innards. How many of you have signed that? Wow, this is a very, very high percentage. When I do it with my freshman class, I get a much lower percentage. Then what I do with them is I say, okay, let's say there were 30 kids and 3 of them raised their hand. I say, well, how many would have signed it for $100? $200, and now we make a supply curve. Namely, the higher the price, and I ask them to be honest, so not to hold out for a higher price because they see where I'm going. Namely, there are estimates that at $5,000, we'd have many, many, many more, a sufficient number of people so that there'd be no people going to the grave without the use of, and no body parts going into the grave without being made use of by other people. So here is free enterprise in action, the magic of the marketplace. Capitalism doing something very humane, saving lives. But no, these socialists in the Republican Democratic Party, and I use the word advisedly, will not allow that. There was a case in Canada where some father, his son needed a liver and he offered $1 million for a liver, and they put him in jail for that. Can you imagine putting someone in jail for trying to save your kid's life? I mean, that's pretty despicable. But that's part and parcel of this idea that it's commodification. We can't have markets in these things. These things are too important to leave to markets. In my view, if you don't want to have markets, don't have them for unimportant things like chewing gum or paper clips or, I don't know, things like that, rubber bands. But if it's important, then you want to entrust it to markets, because markets are coordinative kinds of things, leading resources into areas where profits are higher, and the areas where profits are higher are areas where people's needs are greater. Okay, let me do price gouging, also a Katrina case. As I said, what I'll be doing is sort of a survey of an economics course. Instead of spending a lot of time on any one subject, I'll be talking about 10 or 15 different subjects to give you a panoply of what an economist can say about issues that are relevant to libertarian and political concerns. I could have been giving this lecture at a Republican or a Democratic group. It would be just as relevant. I might be booed and thrown off the stage, but it would be relevant to their concerns. They would all disagree with me on everything. But again, I'm giving you this sort of waterfront view. What happened in the aftermath of Katrina? I was there. It was the most horrendous thing. I don't really mind that FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers killed about 1,100 people. What the heck? Can't make an omelet without breaking eggs. I'm not serious here. I really don't like it. But what really ticks me off, even more than the fact that 1,100 people died, is that those bad people are still in business. Can you imagine what would happen if any private industry were convicted of killing 1,100 people? Well, at the very least, they'd be bankrupt. They'd have the decency to no longer bother us. But FEMA is still there. The Army Corps of Engineers is still at the same old lemonade stand. That's the real problem. You see, the reason I say I don't really mind so much is because human beings are imperfect. We're the mistake-making animal. It's not for nothing that they put erasers at the end of pencils, right? We make errors. That's the human condition. We're on the wrong side of the Garden of Eden. But what we want, what we desperately need, is a situation where if you make an error, to the extent you make an error, you lose money. And if you use a little too much, you go bankrupt. Right? Look, suppose I were to tell everyone to stand up and tell the shortest 5 people to leave, and then bring in the next 5 people. And I kept doing that. Wouldn't the group get a little taller? And vice versa if I said all the tall people have to leave 5 at a time? Well, that's the magic of the market. If you have a system that in effect tells entrepreneurs who can't cut the mustard that you have to go bankrupt, the ones who remain are a little bit better. That's why we're a lot better than the Soviet system. They're not stupid. They've got a lot of chess grandmasters. They've got a lot of very bright people in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. It's just that they didn't have the system of weeding out inefficiency. Okay, so what happened in the aftermath of Katrina was that the prices of certain items went through the roof. Gasoline, flashlight batteries, candles, water, orange juice, milk, things like that. Prices really rose, and they called it price gouging. And Governor Blanco said, we're going to put all the price gougers in jail. And all the people applauded, yay, this is wonderful, those people are exploiting us. Look, high prices in arenas or eras of shortage have 2 salutary positive effects. One, they ration limited supplies. Look, imagine you're at Walmart, and I'll be talking about Walmart in a second, and you're the first online, and the prices are the old and ordinary prices, and it's in the aftermath of Katrina. What you're going to do is you're going to go like this. You're going to grab all the flashlight batteries you can get, all the candles you can get because you might need them, right? All the orange juice, and the people at the end of the line will get nothing. Namely, you're not acting in a civilized manner. You're acting sort of barbarianish. Not that this should be prohibited, but it's not cooperative. Whereas if the prices are jacked up 20-fold, you might say, well, I need 1 flashlight battery, and I'll take 1 candle. And in effect, you're leaving other stuff for other people at the end of the line. So people are acting in a coordinated way, the way we want people to act, if I can put that sort of editorial in there. So that's one salutary effect. The other salutary effect is, think of the people in Denver, or the people in Maine, or the people in Texas. Right now, with the low prices, where Governor Blanco keeps prices down because the price gouges are going to be put in jail, the only incentive that people out here have to help them is benevolence. People in New Orleans are in trouble. We've got to help them. They're our friends, our neighbors, our fellow citizens. Let's ship some stuff down there. Only due to benevolence. But if the prices are jacked up 20-fold, in addition to benevolence, you say, oh, whoa, let me exploit them. And how are you going to exploit them? By satisfying their desperate needs. And as the more and more stuff comes in from outside, the prices go down. In other words, the price is a signal. It's sort of like a cry for help. It's like a cry for help in the wilderness. And a price gouging law is like a decibel level. In other words, you can't yell help loudly. You go, help, help. You can't yell it too loudly. You can only yell to benevolence. But Adam Smith said it's not from benevolence that the butcher and the baker and the candlestick maker give us their stuff. It's out of a keen appreciation of their self-interest. In the short run, you can count on benevolence, but that's no way to run a railroad. If you want to keep the thing going in the long run, you have to mobilize all human capacities to help each other. Benevolence as well as selfishness. Nothing wrong with selfishness. That's the way the world works. Walmart. Walmart's a big exploiter. They pay workers too little. They throw out of business their competitors. At least this is the claim. I don't believe this for a moment. Typically what happens is Walmart opens up a new place, and they want 500 workers, and they get 10,000 people online lining up to get those jobs, to be exploited by Walmart. I mean, if Walmart was so bad, why are they all lining up for jobs? And yes, a few butchers and grocers go broke in town because everyone goes to the town limit where the Walmart has 40 acres and a big apparatus. But that's what happened with the horseless carriage. That's what happened with the horse and buggy industry. If we're going to have progress, we have to have losses in some jobs so that those people can get jobs elsewhere. There is this thing called the lump of labor fallacy. The lump of labor fallacy is this idea that there are only so many jobs to be done, and if you disgusting hogs hog it up by working too fast and working too productively, there'll be less work for me and my buddies. Right? There's only so much work to be done. And if what do you call it? You have a steam shovel instead of men with picks and shovels, or if you have a railroad instead of people walking from here to Chicago with stuff on their backs, well, then there'll be less work to be done because there's only a fixed amount of work to be done. Nonsense. This is a blistering economic fallacy. The amount of work is dependent upon our desires. And our desires are pretty limitless. We want more stuff. There was this wonderful scene in the movie The Producers, which is a wonderful movie for other reasons, where they were running around the Lincoln Center fountain, and Gene, whatever his name was, the accountant, said, "I want everything I've ever seen in the movies." Well, we want lots of stuff. We want a cure for cancer. We want a cure for baldness. We want a yacht. We want to be able to go to Mars for a vacation, right? There's an endless wish list of things. And that's where the jobs come from the fact that we live in an era of scarcity, that we don't have all that we want. And if we all converted to ascetics, like Gandhi, who just wanted a diaper and some urine from a goat or something, although he did want the British out of India, which is, not what do you call it, chopped liver. That was a big thing. But apart from that, he was an ascetic. Well, then we don't need jobs. In other words, jobs come only when we need stuff, and if we don't need stuff, then what do we need the jobs for? So there is no crisis of unemployment or anything like that. CEO salaries. This is another one that the leftists are very unhappy with. That CEO salaries are going through the roof, and this shows that capitalism is evil, that the corporation is exploiting everybody. What's the story behind CEO salaries? Well, CEO salaries, if they get above productivity levels, will create losses for the company. If the CEO salaries are really way out of line, that means that the capital value of the stock of the company is lower than it otherwise would be if the CEO had a normal salary or a reasonable salary, right? Now there's this guy Michael Milken of blessed memory, although he's still alive, but I'll say that anyway. What he used to do is he would have raids or hostile takeovers. And whenever there was a CEO salary that was way high, depressing stock values, he would buy the stocks and kick the old people out. and put in new management and make zillions of dollars. So the market has within it the ability to deal with CEO salaries. But if you put Michael Milken types in jail, and the way they got him is they threatened to go after his brother who was mentally problematic or something, so he caved in. Well, it's sort of like you don't allow firemen and then you see fires. Well, of course you're going to have fires if you don't have firemen to put them out. Right? Of course, if you put a Michael Milken in jail and Michael Milken is the antidote to this problem, well, then you're going to have this problem. So what they do is first they take the market's fangs away or the market's protective mechanism away, and then they say, aha, see, the market isn't working? Let me now move. Again, what I'm doing is 2 or 3 minutes on a whole bunch of subjects, so I'm going to move again. Antitrust law. I have to tell you my antitrust joke. And you guys better laugh, because when an economist tells a joke, you don't ask if it's funny or not, you just damn well laugh. It's sort of like when a bear plays a violin while riding a unicycle. You don't ask if the bear is in tune or not. You say, wow, a bear riding a unicycle playing a violin, great. It's a little much to ask if he's in tune also. So here's the joke. And this joke actually got a lot of laughs when I was telling it to a big audience composed of antitrust lawyers and economists whose bread is buttered by antitrust law. And the joke goes as follows. There were 3 Soviet prisoners all in jail, and as prisoners do, they compared notes as to why they're in jail. And the first guy said, well, I came to work early, and they accused me of brown-nosing, and they put me in jail. Second guy said, well, I came to work late, and they put me in jail for cheating the state out of my labor services. And the third guy said, I came to work exactly on time every day for years, and they put me in jail. They accused me of owning a Western wristwatch. That's the joke. Now, the second part of the joke is there were 3 U.S. corporation executives also in jail for antitrust violations. And they, too, as their Soviet counterparts, were comparing notes. And the first guy said, well, they put me in jail because I charged higher prices, and they accused me of gouging and profiteering. The second guy said, well, I charged lower prices than everyone else, and they accused me of predatory price cutting and gouging. No, gouging is this one. Got that wrong. The third guy said, I charged the same price as everyone else, although it's hard to see how he did given these other 2 guys, but let that pass. And they accused me of collusion. The point is that antitrust is, Ayn Rand used to say that our present law is not law. It's just, no matter what you do, you breathe in, you breathe out, you're guilty of something. You're always guilty of something. So if you charge higher prices, lower prices, or the same prices, you can be put in jail. Well, that's not a law. That's not part of the rule of law. That's just fascism or craziness. That's what antitrust is. So I'll let the antitrust go just based on that one joke. Let me add just one more very quickly. I just have another book out on it. It's not here, otherwise I'd be plaguing you with that book as well. It's a book on why we should have roads privatized, why highways, streets, avenues should all be private and we shouldn't have government ones. So let me just give you 2 minutes on that. Maybe we have some time for questions. Do you know how many people die on the roads of motor vehicle accidents every year? 40,000. Now 40,000 is a lot of people. How many people of our U.S. servicemen, forget about the Iraqis, they don't count. How many, shut up, Iraqis don't count. You're unpatriotic if you think, I'm just kidding here. How many U.S. servicemen have so far died? Something like 4,000 in about 5 years? Nothing. In the Vietnam War, only 50,000 servicemen died in the whole Vietnam War, U.S. servicemen. Here it's 40,000 every year. And do you see this in the newspapers? Do you see anyone concerned about this? Nah. It's a non-issue. Why? Because it's sort of like death and taxes. It's inevitable. Right? I mean, there's nothing you can do about it. Like nobody complains about the weather, although the weather is the government's fault. If they didn't take half the GDP for the last couple of decades, we would have solved that problem probably. So the bad weather is the government's fault. But traffic fatalities are the government's fault. Now, the apologetics for road socialism like Milton Friedman, say that the real cause of the deaths is not government, it's rather speeding, drunken driving, vehicle malfunction. The NHTSA, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, has 125 different reasons, all of which like that, like how far are you away from the hospital, how long does it take for the ambulance to get to you and back, do you have a helicopter, things like that, just very arcane things. Now look, suppose a restaurant went broke. And they said the reason the restaurant went broke is lousy food, poor service, dirty conditions. Would we accept that? No. What we'd say is that's just the proximate cause. Look, suppose I take a gun and I shoot the next guy that comes through the hall there. And you all capture me. And I say, tut, tut, I'm not guilty. It was the bullet that did it. Well, in a sense, the bullet did it. I'm standing, 100 feet away. But that's just the proximate cause. The ultimate cause is me. Well, what's the ultimate cause of the restaurant going broke? Bad management. The bloody manager should have hired someone who could cook, should have hired someone and given him a broom, should have located in a better place, should have done whatever. Well, it's the same thing with road ownership. The management should have dealt with drunken drivers better. How? That's an entrepreneurial decision. But the point is that if you had competing roads, and some road owners could deal with drunken driving in a way that others couldn't, then these guys would bankrupt those guys and we'd have better road conditions. Would we have zero fatalities? Maybe not. Okay, thanks for your attention. Let's have some questions. Yeah?
You didn't say anything about the oil speculators that are driving the prices up.
Oh, yes, those are evil people. Speculators are always evil because they're trying to make a profit and buy low and sell high. Look, arbitrage is the way to go. If the price is low here, you bring it there. You arbitrage through time and space. Look, what's going on with oil is they haven't allowed any nuclear facilities to be built in the last 50 years. They don't allow oil drilling in Anwar in Alaska. They don't allow it here and there. We have these, I was going to call them green environmentalists, but they're really watermelons. Green on the outside, red on the inside. In other words, there are some people that like to run our lives. And they had their wagon hitched to a good horse, communism, and it worked for a long time. But then it came unglued, and now they have to have a new vehicle to run our lives, and it's environmentalism. Yeah, oil prices are high. It's the government's fault. If the government would allow drilling and allow nuclear and allow other things and stop taking all the corn and making it into oil and starving people, we'd be a lot better off. Yes?
Economists are big on free markets and competition. Are businessmen?
Well, let me take issue with both of that. I would say of all the academic fields, economists are the best on free enterprise, but they're not really that good. They're socialists, they're various kinds of socialists, market socialists like vouchers, the Friedman voucher system. But they are the best. They're better than sociologists, historians, political scientists, literature people. Businessmen, one of my favorite novels is Atlas Shrugged. And there are the Wesley Mouchers and the Jim Taggarts, but then there are also the Hank Reardons, the good guys. There are some businessmen who are taking care of business, as we say in Arkansas, business. They're the good guys. There are other guys that are out for corporate government partnerships, which is just another name for fascism. You see most of the corporate giving is not to the Libertarian Party, but to the Democrats or the Republicans. Part of it is defensive. Look, the reason they had a successful antitrust case against Microsoft had nothing to do with that, with Microsoft antitrust. It had to do with he wasn't making the payments to the right boys in Washington. So businessmen are a mixed bag. Some are very good. Many are very bad. Some just don't care, but they know how to conduct business so they can stay in business, and they have to go the government route. It's tough to be a businessman if you really are free enterprise, because the regulations will get you. Yes, sir.
Currently, free enterprise doesn't work for banks going bankrupt if you're a large bank.
Well, it's not free enterprise, but there are bailouts. What is it? You're too big to fail. We had that with Bear Stearns. We had that with Chrysler. We had a lot of that with FDR in the 30s. One of the justifications of markets is that if you don't do a good job, you can go bankrupt. Well, if we don't allow bankruptcy, it's sort of like not allowing any of the dead cells in our skin cells or dead cells in our body to be washed away. You don't make room for new cells. You get arteriosclerotic economics, if I can coin a phrase. I mean, if you can't allow any bankruptcies, it's sort of like not allowing dead cells to go away. You don't get new blood, new ideas. You have economic arteriosclerosis. Certainly, these bailouts are unjustified. The Austrian theory of the business cycle is, if I can give a 30-second rendition, is that they artificially lower the interest rates, which misallocates resources toward heavy industry, which is incompatible with the saving, investment, time preferences of the public. These investments are malinvestments, and the sooner they're allowed to go the way of all malinvestments, namely bankruptcy, the quicker we get out of the Depression. The reason the 30s Depression lasted so long is they kept bailing out. They kept raising wages, which doesn't help with unemployment. They had the Smoot-Hawley tariff, which screwed up international trade. And we're having that now. Hillary and Barack are competing with each other as to who can have more tariffs against foreign companies, because you have to get the votes in the Indiana Rust Belt. And this is not due to unions, it's due to foreigners or something like that. So you have big problems. One last question, because we're just about out of time, and I want to make time to sell some of these books. Yes?
You had mentioned Walmart, but isn't there a portion to that is true, that they're able to artificially keep their prices low because they use us taxpayers to fund their infrastructure through eminent domain?
Yeah. Look, I'm not saying Walmart is on a pedestal. Yes, they do that, and they also favor the minimum wage for a little bit. But the way the left devilifies them, or the opposite, makes them out to be devils. Yes, they use eminent domain, which they shouldn't be, and we certainly don't support that. But I'm glad you corrected me on that. I don't want to have you think that Walmart is all good. But I was trying to focus on the left attack, and they don't attack them for that. One last question, since I picked on you.
Would you address the Fed's, why the Fed is important in what you were talking about?
The Federal Reserve System. Oh, they're an abomination. I had on my list the gold standard and why we should go gold. Milton Friedman has this series, Free to Choose, a pretty good series, film series, and also a book. But whenever people were free to choose the monetary medium, they chose gold and silver. And somehow the Fed, the central banks, took it over because there are only three ways to raise money for the government. One is taxes, but everyone knows who's doing the taxes. You can't blame anyone else for taxes. The other is borrowing, and everyone knows who's borrowing and crowding out. The third way is inflation. And now you can blame everyone. Oh, it's greedy unions. Now, I'm no big fan of unions, but they're not the cause of inflation. Or it's greedy Arab sheiks. Or it's greedy consumers. Or it's greedy... In other words, they can get the money without paying a PR price. So this is a very good thing. Look, if we had a printing press in our basement that could create 50s or 100s, and we wouldn't go to jail for it, there's a big temptation, and especially if you're an evil government. So the reason we have the Fed is because it's a way of getting money out of us painlessly, because we don't realize we're being had. Ron Paul was magnificent in this in his campaign, showing that the gold standard is the way to go. So thanks for your attention. Time is up.